Hello, I'm Dr. Rebecca Hawkins, President Emeritus, Columbia State Community College. We get a reasonably good picture of Columbia State's startup in 1966-67 from print publications like newspaper stories, legal and other official documents, and the college's first catalog and first annual. We also have professional photographs and those taken by the locals. The book, published in 1979, Community Colleges of Tennessee, The Founding and Early Years, preserves the community college's startup years through experiences and observations of the college's first presidents. Columbia State's library archives, Maury County archives, and the Polk home all have collections documenting the college's startup and early years. But it's the people who were there in the beginning whose stories and reflections provide such a rich insight. The faculty and staff, the students, and the community leaders and residents. They were the feet on the ground. They were the folks who made it all happen. They were the ones who were making the dream come true. Their stories, the oral history of Columbia State, have gone undocumented until now. Their stories are not found in newspaper coverage, their stories are not recorded in history books, and their stories are not found in archives. Their stories have been stored up for years in their minds. When asked, they share those stories passionately. It's almost like it just happened yesterday, not 50 years ago. What a delight it's been to reminisce with some of the faculty and staff, students and community folks who were a part of Columbia State's startup. Some of their stories I've captured through recorded interviews. I've listened to the stories of others in sidewalk, sit-down, telephone, and email conversations. I've done my best to capture their fond memories and reflections for all to enjoy. I know there are lots more stories out there that I've missed, just not knowing in whose memories they exist or not being able to find people. And then, unfortunately, some folks have passed away. Others are challenged by health issues, preventing them from sharing their stories. I'm grateful that spouses and children have stepped up and helped out on behalf of some of those folks. I wish we had time to include every minute of these rich stories. It is my wish that what we did include will give you a complete picture of how Columbia State changed the lives of people here in southern Middle Tennessee. I hope you enjoy our presentation of Red Letter Day in the life of Maury County.
Excuse me, where is the new Columbia State Community College?
It's all over town. I'm serious. I'm not joking. What part of the college do you want?
The administration building.
That's in the house next to the West 7th Street Church of Christ. You go down that way 2 blocks.
Max York, journalist-writer for The Tennessean, painted this picture of Tennessee's very first community college in a story, Until the Real Thing Comes Along, featured in the Nashville Tennessean Sunday magazine on Sunday, April 2, 1967. At the time that spring when York wrote his story for The Tennessean, the brand-new Columbia State Community College had no campus of its own. Its temporary campus was in borrowed spaces. Faculty members were teaching classes in buildings all over town in Columbia. Academic classes and the library were located in the First Baptist Church. The Student Center and bookstore were in the Memorial Building, a former federal post office. Science labs were in the new Science Building at Columbia Military Academy. Electronics and graphics laboratories were located at Whitthorne Junior High School. Physical education classes were located at a local golf course, Riverside Recreational Area, King's Daughter School, and local bowling lanes. Students were shuttled between buildings on repurposed yellow school buses by faculty drivers. The service station's owner was not joking. The college's administration could be found in a borrowed house owned by the West 7th Street Church of Christ. Nobody minded that the real campus was still under construction. The dream was being realized, and the hard work was paying off. For the first time, 17-year-olds to middle-aged folks to retirees had a local college that was both accessible and affordable. The classrooms may have been labeled primary, junior, and intermediate, but according to reports from some of those first students, they knew they were in college.
Yes, when I was in the classes, I felt like I was in college.
Yeah, I think the sense of expectation
Okay.
was at the college level, that you were to be prepared, you were to go the extra mile. Yes, I think there was a sense of collegiate expectation.
400 students registered for first quarter classes in September 1966, well beyond the 250 to 300 students expected that first fall quarter. In January 1967, even more students showed up to register for the winter quarter. Downtown Columbia was rocking, with classes and students all over town. 4 miles from downtown Columbia, out Hampshire Pike, the college's new campus was under construction, the real thing. Modern state-of-the-art buildings, classrooms, and labs were being built with lightning speed, all being made ready for the fall quarter of 1967. The excitement surrounding Columbia State's successful startup in 1966-1967 was close on the heels of the state legislature's announcement on June 22, 1965. On that day, the State Board of Education voted to approve Tennessee's statewide system of community colleges. Also announced, the first of the colleges was to be located in south-central Middle Tennessee. And even more exciting for the locals, Maury County was announced as the location for the first of the community colleges.
And we would have times when it looked hopeless. And then we'd get our spirits back up again.
People rejoiced, all the way from the halls of Tennessee's state legislature to Maury County. A headline in the Daily Herald newspaper located in Columbia shouted out, "A day to rejoice. The school bells ring for us." And quickly following that headline came yet another red-letter day in the life of Maury County. June 22, 1965 was indeed a red-letter day. Maury County in south-central Middle Tennessee would have their very own college. Magically, almost overnight, Columbia became a college town.
Now, though a lot of people helped, but only 3 people really deserve credit: Frank Clement, Howard Wharf, and John Finney.
Commissioner Howard Wharf personally toured prospective sites for the college. He selected the 204-acre Hickman Farm along Highway 99 as the best possible location, just 4 miles west of downtown Columbia. The location was highly accessible and was toward Wharf's hometown of Hohenwald in Lewis County, where he originally envisioned the college would be.
Well, let me say this. Commissioner Wharf was a unique individual.
And he was Commissioner of Education.
Right. And Mr. Brinkley was his deputy commissioner, who was a career educator. He'd been in for many years, so he knew all the history and everything. But Howard Wharf, probably one of the few individuals in that level that had really made most all of the decisions himself.
Tennessee's community colleges were designed to be commuter schools with no dormitories. Access by highways and minimum travel distances were important for students and the success of the new colleges.
I knew that the community college didn't need to be in Hohenwald because it's so out of the way and difficult to get to. The only close towns would be Linden and Centerville and Summertown. I wasn't on the committee, but I had a trial in Hohenwald one day, and we got through about 4 o'clock. And I thought, well, you know, I've got time, I'll just go to Mr. Wharf's house and talk to him. And he lived about 3 blocks from the courthouse in Hohenwald. So I went over there, and he was at home. And we talked about, mostly started out on politics. And then we got into the community college. and it's all very friendly. And I just told him that I could understand why he wanted the community college in Lewis County, because it would be a great thing for Lewis County, but we had to look at the future impact it would have in Middle Tennessee. And it was going to be most difficult for a lot of these students to get to Hornwall, at least time consuming.
Mr. Wharf, with his wisdom and having the State Board of Education behind him, Jimmy Jones was a member of that board at that time, as I remember, they chose to come to Maury County. And of course, it's on the west side of Maury County, which is on the road to Hornwall.
On July 12, 1965, the Maury County Quarterly Court unanimously approved a resolution to purchase the Hickman Farm property. The court paid approximately $240,000 for the property. The Quarterly Court pledged an additional $250,000 toward construction cost of the new campus for a total of almost $500,000. The state allocated $1.4 million toward construction costs. The federal government provided $1.6 million under the matching grant program of the 1963 Higher Education Facilities Act. In a ceremony on October 20, 1965, Governor Frank Clement and Commissioner Wharf broke ground for the new campus on Hampshire Pike. Tennessee's first community college was a true partnership between state, federal, and local governments.
I'm pleased that Frank Clement and Mr. Wharf, I've still got pictures of that, and you have too, of them taking the shovel and making that first shovel of dirt to start this college here, because under Frank Clement was known as an educational governor at that time. He was very interested in education and helped provide the leadership to go through the legislature to establish these community colleges.
Just 4 short months after legislators approved the new college in June 1965, campus construction was about to get underway. Architects Yearwood and Johnson rushed with architectural designs and plans. Then in February 1966, Melson Contractors Incorporated was awarded a construction contract for the $2,750,000 project. Completion was scheduled for beginning of the fall quarter 1967, a short 18 months later. Meanwhile, back downtown, the new college was beginning to spring up all over Columbia in borrowed spaces. 10 buildings and recreational facilities were either borrowed or rented.
Commissioner Wharf and his staff moved quickly to initiate the academic programs for the new college. Dr. James W. Clark from Auburn, Alabama, was appointed Dean of Instruction on March 29, 1966. Clark was also appointed to serve as Chief Administrative Officer until a permanent president could be selected. When hired, Dean Clark reported he was given directions by the State Board to be ready to begin classes 6 months later, in September. Dr. Archie Rushton, first Executive Dean of Tennessee's community colleges, and Commissioner Wharf provided guidance for the critical first years of the new college. Together, Dean Clark and Executive Dean Rushton hired the first faculty and staff. Between March and September, 21 faculty, 9 administrators, and 6 support personnel were hired to make up the initial staff. Most of the administrators and faculty came from Florida, New York, Alabama, Illinois, California, and, of course, Tennessee. The support staff members were mostly Maury County residents who were attracted from their jobs in local businesses and industries. Both faculty and staff were excited and proud to become a part of this new adventure in higher education.
I was teaching in Nashville in high school, at Hillwood High School.
Okay.
And I had been there 4 years and had come there from Covington, Kentucky. And my husband had taught at one time and had thought that he would go back into teaching. And when he saw in the paper that Columbia State was going to open, he said, "Why don't you apply for a job at Columbia State? And I will too." So I went down and interviewed with Dr. Clark, Dr. Rushton, I believe. They asked me if they hired one of us, which one would it be? And I said, "Well, we've discussed this, and it would be me. And so they said, well, that's what we were thinking. And so they pretty much hired me on the spot.
I got a call from a Dr. James Clark, who was the acting president of the new college. And he was very friendly and very insistent. But I told him I couldn't come, that I was busy with what I had. Well, then I got a call from a Dr. Archie Rushton.
Yes.
And he was the same. And I was so impressed with both those men on the phone that I really gave it serious thought. They really were very convincing. And then when I would talk to people in Houston and mention where I was going, they would say, "Oh, I know where Columbia is. That's the friendliest people on the earth." So anyway, I made a commitment to them that I would come, but I had to have that first semester in Houston to finish up on things that I felt I had already obligated myself to.
I went down that day, and I wasn't very old, and only people I had ever worked for was my father. So I was a little bit nervous, and when I walked up, this man who turned out to be John Thomas was standing on the porch. It was cold and windy and the wind was blowing. It was in April. And the papers he had in his hand were blowing, and I told him who I was and what I come for. And he asked me a few questions about what I did, you know, and he handed me an application, and Dr. Rushton at that time came up. And at that point in time, I didn't know who he was either. They asked me to come back that night with the application filled out and take a typing test, which I did, and they hired me that night.
We had a custodian named Charlie Edward Snipes, Jr. And he was, at the time, laid off from a job with one of the chemical plants. And Edward was very versatile. Whatever needed to be done, he would do it.
When I first started, was the first one I went through and knowed was Mr. Thomas. He was the business manager.
Yes, he was. And you reported to him,
right?
Right.
So did.
What was your job, Charlie?
Well, it was janitor, handyman, mostly handyman a lot of time.
When I was asked to come and look at the site where Columbia State would later locate, I was a graduate student at Auburn University, trying to complete my master's, but fiddling around a little bit more than I should have. So I was teaching 8th grade English in the Auburn High School and various other grades. But one day while I was the graduate student, I was the graduate assistant to Dr. Paul Scheid in the School of Education. I was teaching my students, and there was a knock at the door, and when I answered it, there were 3 men standing there in business suits, and I was quite taken aback because nothing like that had ever happened to me. And it was Dr. James Clark, who was the dean, the first dean of the school, what I guess would have been an interim president at that time, but he was listed as dean. And then Dr. Archie Rushton, who was later or he might have been then, the head of the community college system, as it would become, in Tennessee. I went to the college for my interview in my little white gloves and my suit. That's the way we did things back then. Dean Clark and Dr. Rushton conducted the interview, and I must have done all right because I was officially hired. And
Right
they told
then?
Right then.
On the spot.
Right then. And they told me to be back on August the 23rd. So I graduated. We piled everything I owned in a little U-Haul trailer. My brother drove the family car and pulled it up here. Mother and I rode in my little Volkswagen.
And an adventure it was. The small group of educators found the community more than willing to help. By September, they had arranged for building space, planned a curriculum, and printed a catalog.
They started off in downtown, the Baptist church, and
Yeah, that was the fall of 1966, yeah.
Oh, and it was exciting.
we took spaces, as I said, all over town, but my room was in the Baptist church, First Baptist Church. They built quite a bit onto it to, I think, make room for us. I think I had maybe 20 typewriters, and when Dr. Clark told me that I could pick my own to buy what I wanted to, well, I hadn't been used to that in high school. I mean, you had to fight for whatever you got. So I was allowed to buy IBM typewriters, and I think I bought all Selectrics, but maybe one or two.
The art program was set up for me. It was already in a catalog.
Yeah.
So I had to adhere to what they did.
Oh.
Yeah, the catalog was already printed.
Uh-huh.
And so I had to do that, whatever courses they want.
And then later on you could make changes.
Yeah, we made changes later on, yeah. The first year, we had drawing in the memorial building, as I told you over the phone. And we had a big bunch of people, and people thought that here comes the Messiah of drawing and so on. And they were sort of disappointed because I taught it like I was taught. And it's sort of a discipline. You have to start with like sketches and go this and this and that. I think they were expecting me to turn them into a great artist, but that wasn't going to happen.
Dr. Clark came to see me and he said, Mr. Guidry, who is going to be the head of the department, which meant that there were two of us, one the head and one the worker bee, he said he's coming, he's going to be late arriving. He has other obligations and won't be here for about 3 weeks, and we will have already started school. He said, so I want you to set up the curriculum and order the textbooks. And I said, yes, sir, I'll be glad to. And then I gulped and thought, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? I went immediately to the telephone and called Dr. Scheid at Auburn, told him my situation. He gave me the name of the head of the English department at Auburn. I called him and told him my situation. I was excited about it, actually. The head of the English department told me, he said, do not worry, Miss Spence. I will send you the syllabi of every course we're teaching in the freshman and sophomore classes at Auburn. And a list of the textbooks that we are going to be using.
Through word of mouth and through local newspapers and radio, news of the college spread just as fast as a tweet on Twitter does today.
All that prospective students know about the college is what they are reading in newspapers or learning word of mouth. We expected from 250 to 300 students to enroll. Dr. James Clark.
As September grew nearer, prospective students began to inquire. John R. Thomas, the business manager, and W. O. Johnson, the admissions officer, took the first applications for admission. They sat on the sidewalk curb in front of the administration building. That was next door to the West 7th Street Church of Christ. Office furniture had not yet arrived. The time for September registration soon rolled around. A Columbia girl, Mary Harris, was first in line and first to register. Right behind her was Martha Woody of Santa Fe.
It was pretty much in the same vein as all colleges did at that time. You picked your classes, and I had a general sense that I would go into the education field. So it was not a great debate in my mind of what courses I needed. That was pretty well tracked. So it was just a very smooth transition to these are the classes that I was interested in, and this would lead to my major, and it was just pure coincidence that I was near the front of the line.
Any Tennessean with a high school diploma or the equivalent was given the opportunity to go to college. It cost only $40 per quarter for tuition, plus the cost of books.
You know, looking back, it seems like it was almost nothing, but At that time, each quarter was a struggle to come up with that extra $45 for tuition.
And we were able to work at Maury, Ohio in the summer.
Yes.
And save money.
Maury, Ohio was still here when I got to.
Right.
And we worked at the drugstore, and also we picked cotton before we got out of high school. So, you were taught to work and save.
If they couldn't afford it, attempts were made to make sure they came anyway. I never knew anyone to be refused admission.
The first quarter, 401 students were registered in 2 days in the Student Services area, located in the Memorial Building.
We wouldn't have been able to take care of them had it not been for the classes offered on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday nights.
Students came from all over, 19 Tennessee counties. 275 students were from Maury County. In fact, 19% of all seniors who graduated from high school in Maury County in spring 1966 enrolled in Columbia State that fall. The student body represented exactly the types of students community colleges were intended to serve. Among the students were youth in their late teens and early 20s, as well as middle-aged and older adults.
One of the great joys that I found was going to school with older students. I had always been around peers my own age, but these people were wonderful, and they were there because they really wanted to learn.
Men, women, and minorities were among the first students. By far, most of the students were commuters. Only 40 out-of-town students lived in Columbia in apartments and boarding houses.
When the campus was downtown, we would get a ride up there to Columbia on Sunday night, and they would just drop us off at our apartment. And we were within walking distance of grocery stores and wherever else we had to go.
The demand by our citizens for increased higher education facilities is certain to make the community college program one of Tennessee's best investments. Dr. Archie Rushton.
Winter quarter in January, an unexpected 538 students registered for classes. 950 students were now being predicted to enroll when the permanent campus was scheduled to open in the fall 1967. This would almost double the 500 students that the new campus was being built to accommodate. The date for opening the new college drew nearer. Excitement and anticipation continued to mount, from Nashville to Maury County and throughout South Central Tennessee. Just before classes began on September 26th, Columbia State's first convocation was held at the Polk Theater in downtown Columbia. There was no permanent campus yet, so there was no ribbon cutting. No matter, the new college was opening anyway, right on schedule. It was Tennessee's first new college in 38 long years. At the convocation, Governor Frank G. Clement was the principal speaker. He told some 300 students and guests, "We share, you and I, in the historic significance of this day and this year." He urged students to take full advantage of the opportunities the college offered. Governor Clement noted that the convocation followed the college's groundbreaking ceremony by only 11 months and 2 days.
One thing I do remember, I guess this was right before Columbia State opened in 1966, Frank Clement came down to speak maybe to the first class at the Polk Theater downtown.
Yes, he did.
And of course he was a pretty effective speaker. But I do remember he said every generation thinks they're living through just the worst time that has ever been. Of course, it was a pretty rough time then because Vietnam was really cranking up and young men were getting drafted and just disappearing. But I do remember that he said that. He said, but when you look back at it, it probably won't be so bad.
Governor Clement called the new Columbia State Community College a $3 million calculated risk, a risk that through this community college program, the cause of education will be advanced in Tennessee. Clement said that one of the persons most responsible for having the college located in Maury County was his beloved friend, the late John W. Finney, editor of the Daily Herald. and the man to whom the Columbia State Library I'm sitting in was named. Clement recalled the many times Finney had sought him out to plead for the cause of the college. He told the students, "In his honor, let us challenge each of you to realize your full potential in this institution."
And the one thing I was so sorry for is that Mr. Finney didn't live to see the college open because he had worked so diligently for so many years to bring it here.
The day Lady Bird came was a great day, and yet I was so sad in some ways because Daddy wasn't there.
Excitement filled the air in Columbia on March 15, 1967, as President Lyndon and First Lady Johnson's motorcade moved slowly through the streets of Columbia to the college's new campus. An American president had not visited Maury County in 150 years. Several thousand people lined the motorcade route.
The Red Letter Day in the life of Maury County still dances in the memories of many of the folks who were at the campus and along the motorcade route on the college's dedication day. Their memories and stories are told with crystal clear clarity. Instead of 50 years ago, you might think this all happened just yesterday. Their stories are told with such wonder, such enthusiasm, and such pride. Listening to their stories, I often feel like I was actually there too. Oh, that I were. Ask any of the people along the motorcade route or at the campus that day, the first thing they recall and report is how cold, windy, and overcast the day was.
But it was a rather cold and windy day, and the weather did not cooperate. Of course, the time of year that we had it, I guess you could expect that.
Cold, chilly, overcast day, us being dressed what I thought inappropriately for the day in more of a summer outfit, but it was showy, so that's what we wore.
You can sure tell it was almost 50 years ago because everyone had on a hat. Even if we were freezing, we had those hats. We pretended it was warm.
The day before the Johnsons came, it was one just beautiful warm day. Yes. But on that March the 15th, 1967, that had to undoubtedly be one of the coldest days.
My two children and I drove the short distance from my house to the campus, and it was kind of a brisk day, so we dressed warmly and took our blankets.
The Daily Herald newspaper reported, "The eyes and ears of the nation were focused on Columbia Wednesday afternoon as President and Mrs. Lyndon B. Johnson hailed the cause of education in their remarks before a shivering but enthusiastic crowd gathered on the new campus of Columbia State Community College."
The day that the dedication was going to be was so exciting to all of us. You know, back then, the President of the United States didn't travel somewhere every day like they do now. So President Johnson and his wife, Lady Bird, were coming, and we were so excited that we were going to come, but we didn't know it was going to be so cold that day.
The newspaper further reported that the approximate 8,000 persons from Maury and surrounding counties cheered and waved placards and banners.
I asked my children if they had memories of that day, and that was Bonnie's first thing to say was, "Mom, I remember Sidney McLean holding up a huge sign saying Columbia, Tennessee welcomes Lady Bird and LBJ."
The thing that prompted me to make that poster was the fact that I really did believe Columbia was a place with Old South charm and New South progress, and I wanted them to know that. And I made a big sign that said, "Welcome LBJ and Lady Bird," and right under it, it said, "Old South charm and New South progress." I wanted them to feel that, and I wanted them to know that we wanted them to have that message, that we were ready for progress.
Most folks forgot the cold biting wind as the White House couple arrived in the presidential limousine. It was a moment many had waited for hours. Their reaction testified it was well worth the wait. Many could scarcely believe that Columbia was being visited by not only the gracious First Lady, but also the President of the United States, leader of the free world, and possibly the most powerful and influential man on the planet.
Never in my wildest dreams would I have ever thought I got that close to a president and first lady. Yeah, it's like, oh my goodness, I'm standing here with the president and the first lady.
When the news that President Johnson and his wife were coming here, that was a red letter day, of course, for Maury County.
What a day it was. Not many people can be close up to the President of the United States because it's the most prestigious office in the world.
Along with state and local dignitaries, Columbia's Central High School band welcomed the first couple when it struck up Ruffles and Flourishes, followed by Hail to the Chief and the Star-Spangled Banner.
One interesting bit of, I think, kind of humor, or the fact that in those days, this was before computers, it was before the fax machine and all these things, when the band director at Central High School had the word that the president was coming to town, he said, "We don't have music for Hail to the Chief."
I believe the day before they came, or 2 days before they came, a Secret Service agent walked in and said, "The president's going to be here." He had been working with us on, I do not know his name. I don't think he ever introduced himself to me. He just
Probably not.
He just had a suit on, you know. He walked in and said, "The president's going to be here," which was a shock to me. Just a lowly high school band director going to play for the president, whoopie-doo. So he said, "The only thing that'll be required of you is to play the Hail to the Chief." And I said, wow. That's something you do once in your lifetime if you're not a service band or something like that, but a high school band to play it. So I started searching our library, our music library. It wasn't in there.
Oh my.
I couldn't find it. So I told the Secret Service, and I said, "We don't have it." He said, "Well, you got to play it." I said, "We don't have it. You don't understand. We can't make it up." He said, "Yes, I understand. You'll play Hail to the Chief with the Ruffles and Flourishes," which I'd never heard of.
Lining the red carpet path from the presidential limousine to the dedication platform were the uniformed young cadets of Columbia Military Academy.
But we were asked to be the honor guard, so I, along with several of my student buddies, were dispatched out here. Our uniform was dress white trousers, a gray battle blouse with white web belts and brass.
You were a good-looking group.
We were disguised well.
I was a student at Columbia Military Academy, and they had contacted the school and wanted us to be an honor guard that would be there to add a little bit of pomp and circumstance, if you will, to the occasion. And because we were going to be dressed up in our little military school uniforms.
As they made their way along the red carpet to the dedication platform, the Johnsons stopped to greet a special education student, Curtis Floyd. Curtis presented the First Lady a bouquet of flowers on behalf of the Maury County Association for Retarded Children. In press photographs of the dedication, Lady Bird can be seen holding tightly to the bouquet of flowers during the dedication ceremony. What a touching occasion for the First Lady. Lady Bird championed the new Head Start program throughout her tenure as First Lady, along with other education programs for learning and economically challenged children. It was these education programs that brought her to Middle Tennessee, concluding a 3-day tour through West Virginia, North Carolina, and Tennessee, accompanied by Secretary of Education John Gardner.
We were honored that day to have one of our little students, Curtis Floyd, and his mother come to present flowers. And Mrs. Floyd said, "Please stand with me. I'm a little nervous. Would you stand with me?" And that's really the way I was honored to meet President and Mrs. Johnson.
All eyes were fixed on Lady Bird as she stepped to the podium to officially dedicate the new college campus. According to many of the onlookers, Lady Bird's gracious, warm words melted away the chilly and windy air.
Very ladylike, very dignified, very comfortable in her role. That struck me, that she felt very at home and very prepared. And I thought she just was, to me, what I expected the First Lady to be.
She was very, very engrossed in being sure that everybody had the opportunity to get an education that wanted one.
She was.
She really was.
Yeah.
And they couldn't have picked a better person to dedicate the college.
I remember her as such a gracious woman, you know, that Texas accent.
Right. Mrs. Johnson charmed the crowd with her brief dedication remarks.
I'm delighted to be here and see Columbia State Community College, which tells so much about the vitality of education in our country. Consider this story. The people of a county provide 204 acres of empty land, some seed money, and a vision. A state legislature and a governor determined that every student in the state shall be within easy distance of higher learning, contribute the first millions, and the vision becomes a plan. The nation's government, more strongly committed to education than ever before, joins the venture with construction money, development grants, scholarships, work-study assistance, help for the library, and enthusiastic moral support. Thus, in the space of 12 months, a college is born to bring together 311 students and 23 teachers who might otherwise never have met.
The enthusiastic and applauding supporters of the college who braved the cold March wind watched as Mrs. Johnson unveiled the dedication plaque. She then presented the college's library with two gifts, a volume of Shakespeare and the film I, Leonardo.
When I looked up, I could look right into the eyes of Lady Bird Johnson, who delivered the loveliest speech and presented the college with a film reel that was, I'm sure it looked bigger than this to me then, but it was about this big around, and it was titled, I, Leonardo.
The last-minute announcement of the president's plan to accompany his wife to Tennessee made his appearance at the dedication especially exciting. He did not speak at length, but his words left little doubt that he was pleased to be in the volunteer state and at the dedication of an educational institution. President Johnson was introduced by his good friend Tennessee Governor Buford Ellington. The president declared that he could not resist coming to Columbia to add his congratulations to the people who had worked so hard to develop the college.
What you're doing here at Columbia is closer to my heart than any other thing that I deal with in the whole range of America's national policy. Columbia offers a fine example of how your federal government and your state government can work with your local government to enlarge educational opportunities. This will be a school for all the people. It can be a place, such as Woodrow Wilson dreamed of, where the important issues of the day can be discussed in what Wilson calls the Parliament of the People. It can serve as a center of excellence in the arts, a home for voluntary service projects, and a meeting ground for the community and regional planners. It's not hard for me to talk at length about education and what it means, for it meant everything to me at a time when my future hung in the balance. I hope some way, somehow, someday, I can repay the debts that I owe in the time that is allotted me, and I shall try.
The words of First Lady and President Johnson that red letter day in March 1967 are documented and are a proud part of Columbia State's startup and Maury County's rich history. But just as important as their warm, encouraging words was the actual presence of the First Lady and President of our country. The President and First Lady were here, right here in Maury County. They came to share this proud occasion with us, the dedication and startup of our community's college. Those standing along the motorcade route could almost touch him as this friendly and outgoing president hung out the limousine window and waved to the crowds.
Our boss at the Middle Tennessee Bank, they allowed anyone that wished to leave the bank to travel the block away to witness the motorcade. Well, it was wonderful. And as they were coming from the Nashville area, traveling Nashville Highway, and then on Garden Street, then they made a right on West 7th Street to go to the college, and I was right there on that very corner. And the president was just almost practically out of the window, you know, waving.
Those lucky enough to find sitting or standing room at the college campus remember how tall and big the president was. He towered over everyone. A few folks got lucky after the dedication ceremony, as the president and Mrs. Johnson departed the platform and moved through the crowd. President Johnson, with those long arms and large hands, reached over the heads of some folks to grab outreached hands of others to deliver a hearty handshake.
Johnson was surrounded by about 6 men, and they were moving to the right in front of me, and I was watching them, and he looked up and locked eyes with me like he recognized me. And he kept looking at me, and he finally broke out of the circle of men, stepped over the safety tape, came right up to where I was, took my hand in both of his, said, "How are you?" I was totally smitten.
Mrs. Johnson and the president did not rush off. They kind of lingered, which was nice. So folks crowded them to just, you know, have an opportunity to get close and shake hands. I remember they were a lot of people trying to get close to them.
The First Lady is remembered as petite, fashionable in her designer red wool coat, elegant with not a hair out of place. Lady Bird was just as warm and friendly as the president was effervescent and jovial.
I am so glad that there's evidence that she had on a red coat. When you first asked me to do this, I had, you know, I've had that story. My husband knows the story. Everybody that knows me knows why I have a red coat and black gloves. And I had a moment of panic wondering, I wonder if she really did have on a red coat.
There are so many fond memories and stories of the day. Sometimes it's the same story, but remembered differently, all depending on who is telling the story or whose eyes we look through. Altogether, these memories become a patchwork quilt, telling a colorful story of what has become a historic day, the red letter day in the life of Maury County.
No matter what your political affiliation, Republican or Democrat, on this day all party lines dissolved. On this day our nation's President and First Lady took time from their grueling schedules to come to Columbia, Tennessee. They came to help us celebrate the beginning of our new college. They helped us dedicate it forever to the service of the people and the progress of our nation. We were honored with their presence, and we were proud. We were proud of our new college, our county, our city, our state, and our nation. Oh my, were we proud.
I was so proud to be here that day because of my personal feeling for education. There is nothing more important that, as I said, totally changes your life. It gives you opportunity, it opens doors for you that would never otherwise have happened. That's why it's so important. And Columbia State is right in the middle of it.
Well, we were terribly grateful. We were grateful to so many people on the national level, of course, and the state, and the people who lived right here in our community who had worked so hard for this.
Yeah.
And we were grateful to the president and his wife for choosing to celebrate with us.
I am proud to be from Columbia. I'm proud that Columbia State is part of our history now. It's just not part of us, it's part of our history.
That was a red letter day in Maury County.
The day was full of pomp and circumstance as state, county, city, and college leaders hosted the President and First Lady of our country. It was a great honor when the First Lady accepted Governor Ellington's invitation to come to Columbia to dedicate our new college. But when the President decided 2 days before the dedication day that he could come and join the First Lady, it heightened the excitement to a whole new level.
Leading up to this point, when they knew the school was going to be dedicated, on the front end, we did not know that President Johnson himself was going to be there.
That day, when she was invited to come, he couldn't help himself. He said, "Oh, I want to come too." Yeah. And he did. Surprised her, surprised us.
And I remember those of us who had responsibilities, such as student ambassadors or any staff members or anyone, when we received word that the President was coming, then we were called into a conference room and then given our orders, so to speak, on procedures and what we were to do and protocol. And I remember that and how it changed dramatically from when she was the only one coming to when it was he along with her, and how they stepped up the safety procedures.
Throughout the day, everywhere the Johnsons went, security was stepped up. Secret Service agents were everywhere. Tennessee Highway Patrol were on duty with the motorcade and were also all over the college campus and downtown Columbia. As evidence, just find Greg O'Rear, Commissioner of the Tennessee Highway Patrol at the time, in some of the press photos. Mr. O'Rear, a resident of Lawrence County, towered well above President Johnson in height and circumference too. Think what a vantage point he had from up there as he kept his eyes peeled over the crowd.
Greg was a giant among people. He was very tall, physically a giant. We still measure snows around here by Greg O'Rear. It's just a common expression here. It was a measurable snow is knee-high to Greg O'Rear.
You didn't have to ask which one was Greg O'Rear either.
50 years later, it is the Secret Service that most people recall so vividly. One of the most fascinating aspects of the President and First Lady's visit, according to the Daily Herald, was watching the Secret Service at work. Their eyes were ever alert. There are lots of Secret Service stories, some funny and some not so funny. Just about everyone in the crowd knew where the agents were: on the running board of the limousine, on the campus building rooftops, surrounding the President and First Lady in the crowd, on the hilltop in Maury County Park overlooking the campus, along Columbia's crowded streets, across the highway at the Barrs home.
I know there were 2 men. It seemed like at some point there was more than 2 there. It could have been 3, and it could have been in a second car. I don't recall, but I know there were primarily 2 agents there, and I had never seen a government agent before. I mean, I'd seen policemen and local law enforcement, but I don't know if I'd ever seen a government agent of any time and purpose, and really didn't know who they were until kept pestering my mother, "Who are these men? Who are these men?" And she finally told me that they were the Secret Service, and they just wanted to look at the house, that they were looking, preparing the site for President Johnson. So they kind of went room to room. But I remember when they first got there, they opened the trunk of that big black car, and of course I was right on their heels, pestering them. But they had either some kind of weapons in there, some kind of guns, something. But that trunk was full of neat stuff I'd have loved to have gotten my hands on.
I remember one thing that was very sobering. When I looked up to my left, I could see the armed Secret Service up on the hills of our peaceful Maury County Park.
And I stepped out the door, and I think it was 3 steps to the ground. By the time I hit the ground, the security guards were all over me. I mean, they were coming, I think they came from out of the ground,
We had Secret Service all over, checking all the phones, and we just kind of stayed out of the way, and finally we just went downstairs and we all sat in the entryway to the house there, and let them do whatever they wanted to do.
I remember the security was extremely tight.
Yes. Lots of Secret Service.
A lot of Secret Service.
That's strange that you would remember the security more than you would remember the president, because that's what I remember about that day is watching Secret Service people on top of the buildings, and I had never seen that. I had seen a president on television.
Well, there was a trailer I think, a semi-flatbed
Yes.
parked for the cameras.
For the press, for
And
the
I
reporters.
remember the Secret Service going through the cameras, making sure every camera was a camera, not a gun.
Yes.
Of course, we were there several hours.
You had plenty of time.
We had
to
plenty of
observe all
time,
that.
and we were seeing all this stuff. And we were seeing them getting them from the buildings with machine guns and walking. And we knew that all cars were pulled from the side of the road the week before. If a car had a flat tire in your front yard, it was gone. Secret Service didn't want any place for anybody to hide.
Some people even think there was a female Secret Service agent seated on the lower level of the dedication platform in the second row. Among all the local officials and guests on that lower platform, only one person is not named in the front page photo and caption in the Daily Herald's dedication coverage the following day. The photo caption probably says it all with "an unidentified woman." From her perch, the unidentified woman had a perfect view looking out over the crowd. She remains an unknown mystery. But who could she be other than a Secret Service agent? Everyone else seated that day on the lower tier of the platform was locally known and named in the photo caption. Press writers and photographers were probably equal in number to Secret Service agents. They followed the President and First Lady from the Governor's Mansion and the Metro Airport to the Hermitage Plantation, to Capitol Hill in Nashville, to Columbia, and back to Air Force One. No doubt today they would have been labeled the paparazzi.
I drove to Nashville and to meet the press corps, and they loaded us on 3 buses, and we were going to the airport to be there when the President and First Lady arrived at the airport. On the way to the airport, along Briley Parkway, a car had stopped to make a left-hand turn, and the bus in front of us stopped. The bus I was riding stopped, but the one behind us didn't stop until it was stopped when it hit us. Knocked us into the first bus, made an accordion out of the bus that I was on, and that's when Jessica lost her wig. I can say this with, no one was injured, seriously anyhow. I think a couple of folks did go and be checked out, but they took our bus out and loaded us on the other 2 buses. It was so exciting, and the thing that I think would have been so different today, the houses along Briley Parkway had knocks on the doors, and reporters were lined up to get to a phone because there were no pagers, there were no cell phones, there was no way to communicate. But people actually got off the bus and ran to the houses. I stayed close to the bus. I didn't try to make the phone call. I wasn't trying to make a deadline at the moment. But back on the 2 buses, we went to the airport and waited for the President and First Lady to arrive, and we made pictures there. And it was crowded. A lot of people who would not be coming to Columbia were there to get a glance of the President and First Lady as they got off the plane. Then we drove to Columbia, and there was an area that had been secured for the media and the photographers, and only a few had credentials where they could get down close to get those close-up pictures.
In a column in the March 16th Daily Herald, Sidelights on the Visit, a bit of humor was poked at the press.
There were more photographers and camera equipment concentrated on the trailer platform set up to the right of the speaker stand than many people see in a lifetime. The tangle of wires and cords was unbelievable. But despite the conditions, made worse by the biting wind which threatened to blow them off, most of the photographers came up with remarkably good pictures.
The photographers covered the red carpet walk between the presidential limousine and the dedication platform almost step by step. It was a good thing the first couple was sure-footed and didn't trip or fall. But just in case an emergency should occur, the Oaks and Nichols Funeral Home hearse had been turned into an ambulance service for the day. Its blue light was attached to the roof, turning the hearse from its normal duties into an emergency vehicle for the event.
I guess people, if they could really see the picture, wonder why there's a hearse there. It's because we didn't have an ambulance service. Right. And if you called for an ambulance, you got to ride to the hospital in a hearse.
Schools in Maury County were closed on the Red Letter Day. It was an opportunity of a lifetime for children, their teachers, and their families to get to see a president and first lady. After all, it had been 150 years since a president of the country had visited in Maury County. Who knows? It might be another 150 years.
I was 14 that spring. My mother, it was important to her that we come out for that event. So she brought us out. It was rainy. I cannot remember if my sister was with us or not, but I remember it was a rainy morning, and we ended up on about, I don't know, 10 throwback from the podium. We had pretty good seats, luckily, so I guess we got here early enough to get a chair, and there were metal chairs all lined up out there, theater style, and we were excited about the opportunity to see the president. Of course, that was a surprise, as well as Lady Bird.
Not all the children's stories took place at the college campus. The Johnsons stopped at the James K. Polk Home and Museum for a brief planned visit. The First Lady reflected in her A White House Diary, later published in 1970.
We next drove to the home of President James K. Polk, an indulgence planned for me. Sometime I hope to visit the home of every one of the 35 other presidents. I have seen at least 12. The house was impressive, with handsome furniture, much of it original. Some of the furniture had been in the White House with Polk. The Polks did so many of the right things. Lady Bird Johnson.
On the street and sidewalk at the Polk home, the First Lady and President Johnson were again welcomed by an enthusiastic crowd of supporters. There at the front steps was a small group of uniformed Girl Scouts who greeted and welcomed the First Lady and President Johnson before they entered the Polk home.
At first, we only knew that she was coming. Okay. And I don't know if she liked Girl Scouts or had some affection for them, or she knew we were a Girl Scout community, or we just volunteered for things. But anyway, there were some Girl Scout troops or Girl Scouts that were asked to come and meet and greet her at the Polk home. And so we were so excited to do that because, you know, she was so lovely, and she was coming here, and we were going to get to meet her. We didn't even know he was coming. I think we found that out at the last minute. And so our focus was totally on her. So we put on our uniforms, and I lived on the route to the college on the Hampshire Pike, and so there was a bank in front of our house. So we stood on the bank in front of the house, and we waved at the motorcade as it went by, and then we jumped in the car, which my mother had turned around, faced out, raced as fast as I think she had ever driven, so we could get to our assigned places here at the Polk home.
The most memorable of all the stories from most people is one that unfolded as the President and First Lady's motorcade was about to depart downtown Columbia. The Dairy Queen story. Apparently, President Johnson was well known for loving a good Dairy Queen ice cream cone. He probably spotted the Dairy Queen store as the motorcade entered downtown Columbia earlier in the afternoon.
After the entourage left the college site, they stopped by the James K. Polk home and paid a visit there. And then as they left there, the motorcade started toward the courthouse, turned north on Garden Street, and all of a sudden it all screeched to a halt there, and I said, something has happened. So I had my camera bag and all, and I went running down 2 blocks to get to the scene, and it turns out that the limo had stopped in front of the Dairy Queen, and the Secret Service had gone in to get ice cream for the President and First Lady. And as I ran up with my camera bag in the street, a Secret Service man stepped out and said, "Get back on the curb." And I said, "But I have credentials." He says, "Get back on the curb."
People found a great deal of humor in the fact that he stopped at the Dairy Queen to have an ice cream cone.
The Dairy Queen stories have been reported mostly secondhand. Even though they are not eyewitness stories, most are pretty accurate. One teenage boy heard that the president ordered chocolate ice cream, But this Dairy Queen didn't serve chocolate, so the president had to make do with vanilla. The Dairy Queen story is officially documented in the president's itinerary. The president ordered chocolate ice cream, but got vanilla. Wonder how many other times the president's orders were not carried out to his specifications.
The people of a county provide 204 acres of empty land, some seed money, and a vision. A state legislature and a governor determine that every student in the state shall be within easy distance of higher learning, contribute the first millions, and the vision becomes a plan. The nation's government, more strongly committed to education than ever before, joins the venture with construction money and enthusiastic moral support. Thus, in the space of 12 months, a college is born to bring together 311 students and 23 teachers who might otherwise never have met.
Whether you attended Columbia State or not, this school in some way has touched your life. I've always thought that the hospital and the college were in a symbiotic relationship. Absolutely. They both were successful because of the other. And the people that were at the college training nurses and technician type people that went over here to work at the hospital, that even though you may not have gone to the college, if you entered that hospital, somebody that had gone through this program probably figuratively touched your life.
This college and institution has always been a big part of all of our lives because it's such a big part of the community and it's so close. I mean, we would, if we wanted to go on a real track and run somewhere, we would come here. Or any activity, 4-H public speaking contest, we did them here. Many public activities that involve children or community activities, this was a part of our life and it was so close to home.
I feel like education and the community colleges in Columbia State changed the whole outlook, as Patrick talked about, because we had been an agrarian society here. And of course, that's what we're all about. But we do realize and acknowledge and appreciate that we needed better education for everybody to really make better lives and make our community a better place. And who would have ever thought that the largest car company in the world would end up coming here one day? And it had to be based on a lot of things, geography and so forth, but let's hope a little bit of it was commitment to education and bettering the community. I hope that figured into the equation when GM was looking.
There were some very bright people out there sewing on sewing machines or doing menial work. Yeah. And it was probably mainly rural people.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Some of whom are bright as they can be, and they're ingenious in things. And I'm thinking, these are people that they don't think in terms of college.
Mm-hmm. Without the community college system, there are thousands upon thousands of students who would never have acquired a higher education in the state of Tennessee. They were from a rural area, they grew up on farms. If they graduated high school, that was a big deal. Mm-hmm. To go on to a university was out of the picture for a lot of them. So the community college system afforded a lot of people the opportunity to acquire higher education. And then from there, they could either go on in a professional field, or they had the skills that they developed through a 2-year program that they could go into the workforce and earn a decent living.
The biggest asset you have here and will have in the future is Columbia State Community College. And I haven't changed my mind.
I would absolutely say in my lifetime, Columbia State is the most important thing that happened to Maury County. Those children around us, so many of them, there was no hope. They were dead end, no way to go. Their best hope was to maybe get a job at some textile plant at minimum wage and be there the rest of their life. And the college gave them hope.
Thousands have benefited from Columbia State's early pioneers. Bill the Field, and they will come. Thousands and thousands more will come. The Columbia State and the First Lady's visionary dedication remarks became our reality. Remember her words.
Listen to the ringing of the school bells across the land. That steady, hopeful sound is the new beat and rhythm of our land. When a Columbia Community College rises from a once empty field, this country expands, not outward, but upward. And I am honored to dedicate this college, to dedicate it forever to the service of the people and the progress of the nation.
I was there from September of 1967 until the May of 1974 is when I resigned and started in private business. I actually got to start up the Civil Engineering Tech program, and the curriculum was already established, so we knew what the subjects were, but they gave me a budget, I think, that year of $250,000 to spend, and I thought that was 2 or 3 million.
I was involved a lot with the students and doing stuff like that, I guess, for some particular reason. And they picked the colors. Years after that, people sort of thought that was something the faculty did, but we did not. And they picked the mascot.
And the colors were?
Green and white. Okay. And then they picked the mascot. We came this close to be called the Mules.
They weren't that much older than us, and they were enthusiastic about may have been their first positions, but you know, we thought that they were Oxford scholars and everything else because they had already gone through college, so we admired them for that.
I'm proud of Columbia State. I caused both of my children to come to have their freshman year at Columbia State. And they both, my daughter in particular, had the Aubrey flag experience.
Columbia State has been a real good asset for this community, and we had a lot of good people on staff.
It opened so many doors for me. Columbia State, I was interested in learning for the first time.
We are so proud to say we have a college in our town.
Columbia State was a godsend for us.
I'm sure anyone you talk to, it would have had an effect on them sometime in their life.
If you were going to define our community in Maury County and Columbia, it is maybe after the Polk home, maybe the second or third thing anybody would name that would define this community. It would be the GM plan, and it would be Maury Regional Medical Center, and I think the Polk home would be first. But Columbia State would be second, third, or fourth, no more than fourth down on the list if you were going to define, you know,
what's made the community,
what's made us who we are.
Whether you attended Columbia State or not, this school in some way has touched your life.